Hi, I'm Robin Gibb, and later on a report by me on the sacrifices made by the men of Bomber Command in World War II. And that's the whole point of this, is honouring sacrifice, not glorifying war. But these guys have always been heroes to me. We have a Europe, a democratic, peaceful, protracted peace in Europe because of what these guys did, and a Europe that I was born into and millions of others. What they did was actually for millions of the unborn, as well as those who existed at the time. And it was a very selfless act because a lot of young men, very young men, died knowing that they were going to die on many occasions, or knew that the risk was really great of dying at the time, and still did it. And really what they were doing it for people they didn't even know. Yeah. Millions of people they didn't know, including myself. And we also have to remember that before Britain was bombed and blitzed, and long before Dresden at the end of the war, that there was Rotterdam, and before Rotterdam was Warsaw, and that was just, a few weeks into the war. It demonstrated what this criminal regime was capable of doing, and it highlighted and warned people well in advance. And of course, a lot of people must know their history, that this is what they were capable of doing. And as I say, this was long before Coventry, Birmingham, London, Manchester, and Southampton, and Bristol, and on and on and on. As well as many other cities in Europe that were reduced to a pile of rubble, burying women and children alive. And those people, they've got to remember that. And of course, that these men were not trying to wage a war, they were trying to end a war. I've always thought all my life that these guys saved the world, and they did, because peace in Europe meant peace in the world. And remember, Britain was the first country to take Hitler to task. We were the first to declare war on Hitler for going into Poland, and we stood alone. After the fall of France, we were alone for 2 years before America came in. Absolutely alone. All of Europe was occupied by the Nazis, and we were alone, fighting a totally occupied Europe by the Nazis. And we had to deal with that. And because what these guys had to do, they had to fly their planes into the heart of Germany, over occupied territory, being fired at in heavily laden planes full of bombs, and it took hours to get in. And then they had to drop their loads in places like Berlin, for instance, which was going to the mouth of hell, as one man described it, and then drop them, and then try to get back. And 9 times out of 10, they couldn't get back because they had to go over occupied territory again to get back to the United Kingdom. And once they got to England, of course, they got to near their aerodromes, and the guys on the ground said, "You've got 5 minutes," because the runway lights will go on for 5 minutes, and then they'll go off, because if it's at night, you see, you couldn't see the runway, and the blackout dictated that they could only have 5 minutes to find the runway. Once those lights went out, you were on your own, and a lot of planes actually crashed.
So you're saying...
It wasn't friendly fire, it was friendly ground.
It was hell, and these guys are real heroes.
Yes, and it was hell. I don't think it's a pivotal part of European history as well as British history. It's the greatest war in history that had to be fought because civilization was on the line, and world peace was on the line. It was unlike any other war that's ever been. And before that, and ever since, there has been nothing like it. And because it happened, there will be nothing like it in Europe again, thankfully. It was almost like a vaccination against the future of how Europeans conduct. Europeans will never go to war with each other again.
But still, 65 years later, there's no monument. There will be a monument.
There will be. There should have been a long time ago, but it's never too late. And the good thing about this is that there's
But why isn't there a monument?
Well, because there was in the 60s, I think there was a lot of backlash against the idea of the celebration of war, or of the exaggeration of celebrating war heroes. And they were almost lampooned to a point where I thought was disgusting. There's been a sea change, particularly in Great Britain and the rest of the world. Then there was never that attitude in America, by the way. The military have always been honoured there. But in Great Britain particularly, well, as you got into the 80s and 90s, the change began to occur where the respect that these men deserved started to occur. And even the government and the present government are starting to recognise. Indeed, I had a personal letter from Gordon Brown just a couple of weeks ago saying that he has complete support for the monument and it's deserved, and he was completely 100% behind it. This would never have happened 20 years ago.
Because they had a very bad reputation.
Well, it's a reputation that was ill-deserved, and in a way it was propaganda actually from the enemy itself, if you say the enemy, the Nazis, because they were putting a spin on Dresden. Well, Dresden, you know, if you say Dresden, it's very easy to say, oh, well, look what they did in Dresden. Bombing's not a very nice thing, but war isn't a very nice thing. And what they did to start with wasn't a very nice thing. In fact, if they hadn't done what they did in the beginning, nobody would have got. We would never have done anything to them if they hadn't done what they did in the first place. The problem is, you've got to end a war. And they would never, if we hadn't have done what we did in Dresden and these other places, it's like Americans don't apologize for places like Hiroshima, because if they hadn't done that, millions more people would have died. Much more than would have died in the actual bombing. And you have to make a stand. We've got to remember that all these cities in Britain, as well as Rotterdam before Britain, and Warsaw before Rotterdam, and many, many cities in Europe were reduced to rubble long before Dresden. It's easy for these goody two-shoes who don't know their history to say, oh, you know, war criminals, Dresden. They weren't. They were heroes. They ended a war, saved millions of lives, and if they hadn't done it, Hitler would never have surrendered, and the war would have gone on. It will be a landmark for London, and eventually and ultimately it will become to symbolise all of World War II and everybody that made sacrifices in World War II, because there is nothing like it to World War II in London.
And you will not rest?
No. I will not. I want, because the guys that are alive now, the survivors, and I say survivors, they're lucky to be alive, and by their own admission, and they had near misses. I want those guys to be there to see that they deserve that, and we owe it to them to see that unveiling. Well, first of all, this monument will happen. We want the Dutch people, because the Dutch people were involved in Bomber Command and were very brave in their actions. We want the Dutch people to encourage and support this monument. We want them to make donations. We want them to be part of it. And it's important that they are. As I say, this is one of the most important monuments in World War II to be built. They lost the most of all the military armed forces in the war. And it's imperative that the Dutch people are represented. But also, you know, we really want the Dutch people to donate to this monument. It'll be something that they'll be proud of, and something that they can make a pilgrimage to every year to honour those people that made the ultimate sacrifice.